Hello everyone, I hope you're having a wonderful week. The last Sawmill video that we released included a blade change and a talk about using the Carbide sawmill blades on the sawmill. And a lot of people have a lot of questions about the Carbide blades, how much they cost, are they worth it? Like, give me some more details, Matt, please. So I thought we'd do a whole video talking about Carbide band sawmill blades. So a little bit of background first off. So I built my saw 7 years ago, and I just bought the standard, carbon steel blades that everyone's familiar with, and most people use that style of blade. It's cheap. That's about it. So I used those for like 3 or 4 years, and then in the summer of 2020, I bought some bimetal bandsaw blades and tried those out. I like those a lot better. Those ones are basically a carbon steel backing with a harder material welded onto the front that becomes the teeth, and just generally they're just longer wearing than your standard blades. At that time I also bought a single carbide blade to kind of try it and just kind of see if I liked it or not. So in the fall of 2020 I put that blade on, and those are the only blades that I have used since, and they're the only blades that I really have any interest in running anymore. So you know that I like to cut big urban wood, and that presents sort of two challenges. The bigger challenge is the overall size and scale of that log. For the saw to be able to make those cuts effectively, the blades need to be like spot on, perfect, amazing. So what I was finding would happen is when I first started and I was running my standard cheapo carbon steel blades, if I left that blade on for more than one log, sometime in that second log I was processing, the blade would start to dull and start to wander. So I got to a point where if I was going to cut a sizable log, I would put a brand new blade on regardless, because it's not worth it to me, the risk of that blade wandering in the middle of that log when that bigger stuff has a fairly high value. Those blades that were too dull to cut a big log perfectly were still good enough to cut a lot of small stuff. They had no problem tracking straight in something 24 inches in diameter or smaller, but 36 or 48, they just couldn't handle that size of log or the size of cut anymore. Second consideration, which actually isn't as big of a deal that I think most people think is a bigger deal, is the embedded steel and metal. A lot of the times the embedded things I find in trees are so small and insignificant that they have no impact on the blades whatsoever. And I think people like to assume that the urban wood has metal in it regardless, like every single piece is going to have something in it. And at least in my experience, it's not uncommon to find metal in trees, but it's also not like something that's going to happen every single time, maybe like a quarter of the time. And what you're going to find are going to be insignificant, like staples or small nails, things of that nature. It's pretty uncommon to find something that's like a showstopper in a tree. So what I have found is that the carbide blades just naturally excel at both of those things. They can cut big stuff, they can cut through steel and metal and embedded objects without any problem whatsoever, and they keep cutting and cutting and cutting. One of the issues with hitting any sort of embedded metal with a regular blade or even a bimetal blade is that as soon as you hit it, those teeth dull, the set changes, and then the blade wants to do this for the rest of the cut. With the carbon steel blades, the blade will do this a lot. The bimetal blade, you'll hit something metal and they'll dull, but at least you'll get a flatter-ish cut. You can complete the cut and get out of it and then change your blade. With the carbide ones, you just keep going forever, and they don't really stop. The overall theme of my thoughts on this are, if you're cutting things that are high value or you're looking for a high enjoyment level, I think, at least for me, running the more expensive carbide blades is going to be more valuable, because you don't have to deal with all of the BS of your blades. You throw the blade on, it cuts perfectly, it keeps cutting perfectly. I'm cutting things that are of high value. Each slab is going to be worth several times the cost of a blade. And I'm also out here trying to actually enjoy the process of sawing. I don't really enjoy trying to chase the problem with the blade, worry about a blade if it's going to be wandering on me in the middle of a cut. I don't like that sort of headache and that added mental load of sawing. I built my saw in a way that would be, it would produce nice flat cuts consistently and be like a sawing experience dream. but then to throw a cheap blade on there that's not going to last, it's going to keep you wondering, and you're going to be stressed out the whole time. It's just not worth it to me. So let's run through the costs real quick. On my saw, it takes a 310-inch long blade. That's just under 26 feet. I run an 1.5 inch wide band, and then the bands are anywhere from 0.045 to 0.055 inches thick. And the standard carbon blades that I was buying, they're actually right here. I got one left still from back in the day. $48 a piece. So this is 48 bucks. You know, for me, I felt like that was like, oh, whatever. You know, if I use one blade per log, 48 bucks out of a log that a single slice is worth 500, 600 bucks, that doesn't really matter. But it's the mental thing of worrying the whole time. The bimetal blades, those were $106 a piece. They did a lot better than these carbon blades. Like they would, if they hit anything, they would come out of the cut and be fairly flat, but they'd be kind of like pretty much done after that point. But at least you didn't ruin your cut. And then lastly are the carbide blades. These ones run me $160 a piece, or at least they were $160 when I bought my last set in 2020. And at first it seems like a huge jump because it's like over 3 times the cost of a standard typical bandsaw blade. But in reality, when you look at like even this, like the actual tangible numbers with it, not the intangible like mental load of is my cut getting like screwed up, these end up being cheaper kind of in the long run. So behind me, 1, 2, 3, 4. These are all the dull blades I have, or the ones that are not going to be cutting anything big anytime ever again. And that's 3 years worth of cutting right there. And I'm cutting more now than I did in the previous, like, what, 3.5 years that I had my saw before I switched to carbide. So that's kind of cool. It's only 4 blades. And I guess the one on the saw now, I'm on my 5th one. And just for comparison, here are not even all of the blades that I ran through before making the switch to carbide. I think I would have had like 20 or so more of these that I got rid of separately. But this is the stack of used blades from like the first, whatever it was, 3.5 years, plus like that much more. So just from like a, that's a big difference in like actual blades that got used. From a real world, real numbers kind of perspective on longevity, this is the log I was cutting in the video that prompted this video. I changed the blade after making this cut. So the blade that's on my saw now made this cut and all the way down this whole log. After that, Chad and Colton were here and you saw us cut up their big walnut butt log. That was the same blade. They were here again for their giant walnut crotch thing, the huge one. And then they were here again for that putrid burl thing. We also saw their crotch log with the giant burl, which you'll see this Saturday. And then in about a month, you'll see us cut the last of their logs. So all 5 of them. It was a really long, big crotch log thing. And the blade that's on there doesn't really seem like it's showing any signs of wear or any sort of issues. So I will likely get another at least 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 logs this size out of that one blade. And if you want a really good comparison from like an actual like production sawmill standpoint, Lumber Capital Log Yard posted a video about the carbide blades and their experience with it a few months ago. And I thought that was really interesting because it really illustrates the point of the biggest difference is the fact that you're not actually changing the blade. And in a production sawmill setting, if the saw isn't running, you're not making money. So if you're spending, let's say it takes you 15 minutes to change a blade and you have 2 employees that run your sawmill, that's a half hour of lost productivity every time you change the blade. If you got to do that, however many times it takes you to compare it to a carbide blade, if the carbide blade lasts you 4 times as long as a standard blade, that's 3 less blade changes you're paying to have done. That's an hour and a half of added productivity for your sawmill. You know, you can figure out what that's kind of worth to you. As far as sharpening goes, you can sharpen all these blades. The only difference with the carbide ones is you're going to need a diamond wheel for your grinder, but otherwise be kind of the same. What I have found though is that the carbide blades, they don't dull. Like I will not dull the blades before I actually like distress them enough that they're not usable. So what happens with that carbide is it's either gets chipped or damaged, or the brazing fails and it loses the teeth. So over time, those teeth kind of fall off. You could rebraze all new teeth on there, but you kind of get to the point where it's like, okay, it's missing 100 teeth, or 100, it's missing in, there's 100 teeth that are missing and or damaged. It's not really worth it at that point to braze on all new teeth and regrind them. Now, one of the biggest differences between the carbide blades and the standard ones is the way that they actually clear the kerf. So on the standard blades, they're gonna have the teeth actually bent out to create the set on the blade. And the set is going to be what creates a wider kerf than the body of the blade. One of the more common comments I get is, aren't you making the saw work harder by having all that weight stacked on top of the blade when I'm cutting? And in reality, it makes absolutely no difference because the wood is never in contact with the body of the band as it's sawing. Actually, in my case, it goes this way. The teeth are actually cutting a wider channel than the thickness of this body, so that it's just kind of floating in the kerf. It's not rubbing against the wood, there's nothing squeezing it, pressing on it at all. But on a carbide blade, and you can see that on like a carbide table saw blade, the teeth aren't bent out to create a wider path. It's the carbide that extends past the body that actually creates that bigger kerf. So one of the downsides to this style is if those teeth get bent or warped or damaged or anything on just one side versus the other, it's going to cause the blade to cut unevenly and start trying to climb or dive or trying to find a least path of resistance because it's not cutting uniformly. And lastly, as someone who saws a lot of urban material and deals with a lot of embedded metal, or at least more than most people, I guess, embedded metal has now with carbide become completely like not even a thought in my mind. Before I didn't really care that much, but now I'm like, doesn't even make a difference. So before maybe I'd be worried about like I don't know, this is like 20 penny sinker nail thingy. Now this wouldn't do anything to my blade. I would cut through this and probably I would hear it go pink and then be no other like evidence of actually cutting through that. And then I can cut through stuff like this. That's a side stop off of my saw. That is a 2x2 steel tube with a 1/4 inch wall thickness. Sliced that right off, kept cutting that log, that slice, finished that log. It's like it just doesn't matter anymore. I don't have to think about it at all. Oh, I'm wearing the right shirt for this too. Okay, lastly, as far as suppliers go, let me run through this real quick. So when I first started, I bought my blades from Cook's because that's where I bought my wheels from, that's where I bought my guides from. Seemed like a pretty easy thing to just buy their blades as well. So I ran their Super Sharps for a couple of years, and then I switched to the Lennox, like the GT blade. I bought those from bandsawbladesdirect.com because they had online ordering, and I could just order blades laying in bed at 11 o'clock at night on my phone when I suddenly remembered that I forgot to order blades that day. Didn't have to call anybody or deal with any of that stuff over the phone like I did with Cook's. The bimetal blades are from Wood-Mizer, and then the carbide blades are also from Wood-Mizer. I wasn't able to find any other suppliers that had 1.5" carbide. There were plenty of them that sold them in 2-inch widths, but only Wood-Mizer had them 1.5". So if anyone else knows of a supplier that actually sells them 1.5", let me know. I'll try a different brand or what have you. So I think that's gonna do it for this one. Hopefully that answers all of your blade questions, and who knows, maybe it will make you come up with some more or something like that. So thank you as always for watching. I greatly appreciate if you have any questions or comments on the homemade giant bandsaw mill thing, anything back in the shop or whatever, please feel free to leave me a comment. As always, I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have, maybe even make a whole video answering your questions. Until next time, happy woodworking. That tire is hot.